I want to like understand, right? Like, what is that thing where you have to accept, like, okay, I am different. I disassociate from the identity that was created. And what are the steps that you really have to take or look at first to rebuild your life and like this new identity or identify with new, healthier habits?
Yeah, it's a long process. It's a long process.
Right.
What I like to do, and this is across the board, regardless of what I'm dealing with, is I like to start with what we call psychoeducation, which is teaching people about whatever the issue is. So in this case with trauma, I teach them about what happened in their brain.
I love that.
When this happened. And, you know, and so if we talk about, they developed, oh, it's my fault, I shouldn't have gone over, I shouldn't have worn the thing, whatever. And so we talk about, so these things where you're blaming yourself and this and that, this is what's happening. And so I help them sort of fill in the blanks by explaining what actually happened with them when the thing went down. Right?
That's so good.
And that helps a lot because then people start to feel like, oh, okay, I'm not crazy.
Right.
Because it's oftentimes you can start to feel crazy.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that I do is I talk about different ways in which trauma can like show up. Like we talk about like individual trauma. We'll talk about like group trauma, talk about mass trauma, talk about historical trauma, and just view it through different lenses because what it helps people do is understand they're not alone.
Yep.
Which especially when people go through individual traumas, they can feel isolated.
Absolutely.
So you're not alone. Trauma happens all kinds of ways and millions of people have lived through it and survived it and can overcome it. And this is what that process looks like. So a lot of early education and then, like I said, going through the trauma narrative and then incorporating some of the rhythmic movement and sound stuff to get that body piece in. Also empowering them by teaching them how to self-regulate because the truth is we all live with triggers.
Can you describe self-regulation?
So self-regulation, again, that fight or flight response is going to be triggered. The heart rate's going up, the blood pressure's going up. These things are happening. So an easy one to access is deep breathing. So it's 4 seconds in, you breathe in, exhale. And you hold for 4 seconds. Just hold your breath. And then release for 4 seconds slowly. And what that does is it brings your attention to your breathing. And when you're breathing that slowly, the rest of your body's systems begin to also regulate themselves. Right? Because again, when your heart rate is up and you're hyperventilating, you're
right.
So when you are very intentional about slowing that down, the rest of your body's systems can also slow down. The heart rate goes down. You start to also recognize that where you are may not necessarily be a dangerous place. So another one is what happens too with spiraling thoughts is that if you're triggered and you think the thing is dangerous, the situation is dangerous, the person is a threat, you start creating all these stories. They're going to do this, they're going to do that. And it's like the girl, I would tell you, she would sit down and she would think, eventually he's going to attack me and he's going to take me off somewhere and we're going to end up having sex. Right? He's going to rape me because this is how the story goes that quickly. He just sits right down and she's going. Right? And so, the other thing that I would have her do is it's a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise where you identify 5 things in the room that you can see. Mm-hmm. And then you also identify 4 things you can touch. 3 things you can hear. 2 things you can smell. And then 1 thing you can taste. Because what that does is, again, it slows you down, but it brings you back to the present moment. Yeah. Because the mind tends to go right into, he's going to take me somewhere else and then he's going to drag me in the back. So you're somewhere, you're still sitting at your table in the restaurant, but your mind is somewhere in an alley where he's taking you and drag you to rape you. Right? So when you bring yourself back by doing the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, identifying things in the room that you can see, smell, hear, taste, and touch, then that regulates you. You realize you're in a safe space. You're not being threatened. You can come back sort of to this present moment reality.
Yeah.
Which, again, when your mind starts to wander and go crazy, it can spiral very, very quickly. Into a dangerous place. So those are some things. There's also something called, you essentially squeeze, tighten, progressive relaxation, where you tighten your body and then you release it. Because again, when you're in that hypervigilant state, you find yourself like sort of tightened all the time, ready to go at all times.
Right.
And so if you exist like this, and it becomes your new normal. You don't even realize that you're carrying stress, that you're constantly gripping the steering wheel. You don't realize it. So when you do the progressive relaxation, what it does is it gives you that internal sensory sort of feeling of the difference between being tense and being relaxed. And when you do that intentionally, when you find yourself tense, you'll be more readily able to identify that and tell yourself, well, I can relax.
Yeah.
So it's really about the biggest part of therapy when you're talking about treating someone who's lived through trauma is creating a safe space. Like literally before I do any interventions or education, say that you're safe. You can say anything. There's no judgment here. I will make sure you're protected. Like creating space for them to know, like, I can lower these defenses.